My name is Urooba, and I'm a Division 3 student. I'm studying anthropology and public health, and I go by she/her pronouns.
My name's Lauren. I use she/her pronouns. I'm also a Div 3 student, and I study clinical psych, psychoanalysis, and creative writing.
My name is Olai. I'm a second year Division 2, so third year technically. And I study performance art, activism, and sociology. And I go by any pronoun.
Ed Wingenbach, he, him pronouns. I'm the president, and my faculty expertise is political philosophy, particularly democratic theory and conflict.
I remember the conversation we had with the president at the cultural center like a couple weeks ago, I would say. And a lot of people were conveying their sentiments about how they feel isolated in the community because the campus is white majority. And they feel like most of the spaces on campus are dominated in a sense by white students, and they feel excluded from the community. And then they were talking about how there are some faculty and staff members who left Hampshire after spring 2019, and then they feel less supported. And then they also mentioned about how there's no person of color as a therapist or a counselor at the counseling center. So these were some of the sentiments that were conveyed from that meeting that I remember, and I would say probably these are the major concerns that they're having.
Yeah, and it seems to me that this is one of the things that is not distinct to Hampshire, but is something that we should be, given our mission, should be more attentive to, which is, most colleges are historically or persistently white institutions, right, built by and for white people and white culture. And so to sort of say, well, we want to be inclusive, come join this place that was built by people like me, for people like me, is a kind of a weird thing to do. And so, one of the things we were talking about last time when I was here was, how is there ways we could think about the work we can do on campus around being an anti-racist place, to be not just inclusive, but to change who we are, to be more welcoming. And for me, the parallel of that is the work that's been done here over the last, 5 to 7 years or so about being a place that is welcoming of people who have lots of different gender identifications, right? So not just, hey, come here and be comfortable, but making it a point about, naming pronouns, but changing the built structure, right? We've changed our bathrooms work. We've changed a lot of things about the culture of this place really intentionally. And one of the questions that I think is an interesting one is, how would we pursue similar kinds of strategies to decenter the historically white character of this place in the way that we've been able to make a lot of progress on gender identity, right? So I don't know if people have ideas for how we can do stuff like that here.
I feel as though there is an issue with only students of color speaking about issues in regards to students of color, and in that way they are being tokenized for the fact that they're the ones that are supposed to be talking about these issues. And there's very little conversations happening among white students about social issues regarding race and ethnicity. And so I think the responsibility lies on white students to educate themselves and to stand up and take more positions where they are also contributing to helping the problem and not just leaving all the work to students of color.
Yeah, I would say, to go off of that, there's definitely been a trend of students of color having to kind of educate white students on campus. We have things like the Engage conference and stuff now that's been going on since my second year. And I think those are good sentiments. I just think we need to take a lot of that energy that we have on like full campus days devoted to, like the Engage conference, and bring that into classrooms, bring that into more community events in the counseling center. I know that's something I hear about a lot, especially studying psychology, that students who don't have access to or who can't afford off-campus therapy or like mental health support often don't feel comfortable going into counseling services because it's like all white cis female therapists. So
how do you think people would respond, and by people I mean students and primarily here white students, to a campus where they were not just once in a while asked to think about their status on an institution that is, you know, predominantly and historically a white institution, but sort of kind of constantly being provoked to think about their responsibility for the way that power and wealth have shaped places like Hampshire. I mean, it's a really uncomfortable place to inhabit all the time, right? And so that's one of the problems, or one of the social problems of race, is that, you know, students of color, people of color, faculty of color always inhabit that position of discomfort, right? And white students, white faculty, white people get to dip into it and then pull out when it gets a little difficult, right? Are there ways? I mean, if we were a place that really took that seriously, then a majority of our students, like all of our students, would then be uncomfortable all the time, right? I mean, is that something we could do as a community?
I feel as if that's necessary.
Mm-hmm.
We have to look at the uncomfortable issues in order to make them different, in order to improve them. If we are being comfortable all the time, or just accepting that our discomfort is only momentary, then nothing is going to change, nothing is going to get solved. Nothing is going to be solved. So it is the responsibility of people who aren't subjected to discomfort to recognize their privilege and say, I want to improve this issue, so I will take on the responsibility of existing in that discomfort, because this is the world we're living in, and to not look at it is you're contributing to the problem.
Right. So how do we create then a culture on our campus where that is the default for people, right? That we expect and enable people to live in that kind of discomfort without creating a campus where people are afraid to speak to one another, right? Or where they're afraid to make mistakes as they inhabit that discomfort.
I think probably starting off with like small groups, like we do at the launch series. Like we have these small group discussions about different topics, and we talk to each other, because I think there's a certain idea of not coming off as politically incorrect, or like saying anything that's wrong, or going off of something that might hurt someone. So I think just because our community is extremely conscientious at times, I feel like we do not want to get up to the bar where we want to experience any sort of discomfort or like talk about such complicated issues. So I would want to imagine that probably starting the conversation within small groups might just give it a head start.
Have any of you had any experiences over the period of time that you've been in Hampshire where you've had productive conversations that actually kind of got at the core of these questions of race and power and history in a really useful way? You know, examples that we could learn from and think about more broadly? I really hope that there's
Yeah, speak about the bone.
That's interesting. Well, I did have one thought, which is that we are on this campus in order to learn, and part of learning is making mistakes. And so we need to accept the fact that making mistakes is part of the process of becoming better people. And that means saying everything that we're feeling and experiencing so that we can learn from those reflections, learn from one another, and hear each other. So I participate in these talks called the BOEM Dialogue, which happens every first Wednesday of the month. And it's hard to explain, but in its simplest form, we just sit in a room for 3 hours and talk about whatever we want, but within the structure of BOEM, which is a philosopher slash therapist or counselor who created a certain way of communicating that was about checking your assumptions and doing a lot of inward self-analyzation while you're speaking in conversation in order to recognize where are my thoughts coming from, how have my experiences shaped the way that I speak to other people and the thoughts that I have about other people. And so while you're in the dialogue, you constantly say, I am making this assumption, or I have the assumption that blah, 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 in order to recognize that we are all coming from different levels of experience and we're all coming from different places of influence. And when we speak, there's always a bias. So if we recognize those biases and the things that were taught to us, we can start to dismantle the colonization that exists in our own brains as well as in the world. Was there something specific that I should
say? More people should go to it.
Yeah, more people should go to it.
Shameless plug.
Do you have a sense that conversations that take place in the more academic parts of the campus have a similar possibility for that invitation to openness and making mistakes? One thing I thought was really interesting to me about this is that when I talk to people about what Hampshire does for students, and one of the reasons that our students are so successful is that one of the great things about this place is that it invites people to fail, right? It creates space for you to. This is a really hard place. It can be a really hard place in part because you can fail and then get a narrative that explains how your failure was productive, and you can learn from it, and you try again, and you make progress. And one of the things I've heard in different ways about conversations about race and ethnicity and identity is that fear of failing and learning from that failure, right? And it sounds like you're describing one place where that happens. Is that fear a real fear out in our academic areas, in our social areas, or is that something that people think is going to happen, so they're not willing to risk that failure?
I would say in academic settings, there are certain faculty members in certain schools, but I know we're trying to move away from that, but CSI and creative writing areas that will definitely foster those difficult conversations around race or around sexual assault, and content academically tends to stem, and you can have conversations more openly that way. I have definitely taken more NS classes and things as well where the professors are not in a state of mind to be having those conversations, and it doesn't fit in with what they're teaching. And I think it's also just faculty of color, they have a lot of pressure to educate everybody on campus. And I think that they're being, it's not a fully formed thought, but there's a lot of pressure on them to show up and to change things versus other faculty members I think could definitely improve.
I agree with that because I feel like people of color have in general that kind of pressure that they need to educate others. For example, something as simple as getting our names pronounced correctly is such a hard deal, even though it's such a minor thing, but often people tend to change their name to something more Americanized so others can pronounce it correctly, but they should not have the burden of teaching others. This should be shifted. This should be division of labor in a sense, people can, and it's not hard if they could get a degree from if most of them have a doctorate degree. If they can do that, probably they can read a couple more
Well,
books.
this goes back to say what advantage Hampshire already has in a lot of these areas is that there are a lot of places where faculty members are unwilling to touch questions of race, power, and oppression because they have an audience of students who will react poorly to it. Right? And here, at least in principle, we have a selection, students who've selected to come to Hampshire, most of whom at least believe that they want to pursue a more just society. And so that initial barrier of, if I talk about race, half of this class is going to give me a bad evaluation, shouldn't be a barrier here, which in some ways tells you how powerful the discomfort and taboo about talking about race is. That even in the place that is probably the easiest college, outside of maybe historically black institutions, right, but the persistently white institutions, this is probably the easiest place to have that conversation. And if it's not happening here, right, that tells you something about how hard it is to have anywhere. So I think you raised another question. I push back on this a little bit about other kinds of issues of sexual assault and mental health, and the sense of, are we addressing those? Can we address those? I'm not sure how to articulate that question. Right? So I'm wondering but clearly there's a question that's brought out sent in from students, right? That people are concerned about how effectively the college is addressing those kinds of questions. It may be helpful to translate that question a little bit, what you think is going on there, what's behind that kind of question, what isn't being discussed that is provoking that kind of a concern.
What I really I'm trying to interpret from the question is like, if as a campus community, are we addressing some of the complicated issues? And one thing that I can really think of on top of my head is something that I've been working on, is getting free menstrual products on campus. And it came to me as a surprise when I got to hear that we don't really have that practice, and it's been an old school. Like, we spend so much money on campus events and other things, so we can definitely pull out some money for that. And it has taken me around 2 years just to convince people why it is an important thing to have on campus. And to have it's such a great thing that we have all gender bathrooms. Like, that's so much progress. But with that, not having toilets as per the menstruation friendly design, or just like not having free products anywhere on campus, and for a very long time the Ham store didn't sell any products either. I'm not sure if they're doing it now, but they're doing it. Yeah, so for a really long time they didn't sell it, and then the location of our campus is in the middle of nowhere, so it's very hard to create access that way. And I feel like that's something that I've been trying to advocate, and I feel like a lot of my time and energy went into convincing people why it's an important issue when it should have been a given thing. Mm-hmm. So I feel like there's a certain mentality that we have to go an extra mile just to convince people for certain issues. Like, this is something that needs to be addressed, and I feel like that's something that's picked up from our society in general, like how we tend to blend symbolic violence within our structure so easily, thinking that inequalities are fine to have.
I thought it was really an interesting point there about that. This discussion of something that has been, it sounds to me like an effective intervention to bring something to people's attention that they weren't paying attention to, and then got some productive response and is moving hopefully more productively, right? But that as you get to the end of that, you said, and this is something that should have been a given, right? And it's an interesting, as somebody who studies political science and democracy, it's always an interesting question for me that, like, what people fight for are the things that they think should be the givens of a society, but everything that's a given now is probably something that somebody had to make an argument for, right? And so there's a kind of a positive version of that, which is this is maybe a place where you can start making those arguments, and over a year and a half, people are open to being persuaded, as opposed to that doesn't matter, right? But that there's that frustration of, well, why do I have to fight for this, and then why do I have to fight for the next thing? And that question of kind of democratic justice is, the next thing that should be a given and will be hopefully in 10 years is something that we right now maybe haven't even imagined. That 10 years from now, people will be like, I can't believe they didn't do that, right? And the people in between will be frustrated by saying, this is obvious that we should be doing it, and why do I have to fight for it? And that's how that sort of change happens. So I guess for me, the pushing back to this question about can we have these conversations is what you just described as an example of Hampshire working in its frustrating, we've got to argue for everything way, or is that an exception to a whole bunch of other things that people want to push for and do here, and they haven't found the energy or the direction or the access that you found in making menstrual products available? Right? Does that make sense?
That makes so much sense, because I agree with you saying that we should be recognizing any progress. At the same time, like, I think it's a big deal that we're talking about how we should be recognizing certain important issues within the community. I feel like that's progress. And like similarly within this example only, like 10 years ago, probably nobody was talking about it. And how it's a given now, and now that the government and other people are really thinking about the same issue at the same time, I feel like that's incredible progress as well. So I agree, like, we should be like recognizing the progress made within as well throughout. And yeah.
I wanted to link this to when you need help, do you get the help? When you go and fix something for yourself and you put in that work to try and fix an issue, are we recognizing these things?
What came up for me during this was the fact that most change on this campus happens because students push for it. And I personally feel like it's almost too much pressure put on the students to make the changes happen, where something as simple as menstrual products being made available to students is something we have to fight for as students when we should be focused on our education. And this has been my experience consistently at Hampshire, where I am fighting with the administration or fighting with the school itself to make change happen, as opposed to focusing on my own education. I mean, we can look at the student protests of last semester as an example of that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to go off of that, I mean, I definitely love Hampshire, and there's not another school I would have gone to. I don't think I would have gotten through college had I not chosen to come here. But a lot of my Hampshire experience has been fighting for, like, you know, access to classes, access to accommodations. You know, a lot of the psychology faculty for me was, like, laid off, and it was like, well, who's going to be on my Div 3 committee? And, like, chasing down the administration and people in CASA, like, to do something that was a requirement of the school. And I feel like while we do make a lot of progress at Hampshire, it's also a very, like, isolated campus in a sense. And people do things and people fight for things, but it exists in a vacuum, and everybody kind of has to have their own individual struggle. When I feel like if we had more of a community, and I'm not sure how we would do that, it wouldn't have to be so individual, and it wouldn't have to be so, like, personally frustrating for each student.
I think also more recognition for when students make something happen would add to that sense of community, and also just make us feel as if we are making change happen, as opposed to these things happening in a vacuum and us never hearing the actions that students take to improve our school and our community.
Any ideas to kill the vacuum, make connections, foster conversation?
I think that's such an important thing that you mentioned, like the lack of communication between the administration, staff, faculty, and students is such a wide gap that I don't know how we're planning to fill that up. Like, I introduced this idea of free menstrual projects at an Engage conference, and I got incredible response. Like, there were so many students who gave me their email addresses and phone numbers, and they're like, please keep in touch. And I thought, we are an active community. Like, people believe in the collaborative spirit. It's just that the word doesn't go out really well. And I think, I mean, like, for example, the BOEM dialogue, that's such an incredible thing. And I'm not sure how many students know about it. Yeah, I feel like the communicative gap is so wide. So maybe thinking about how to bridge that gap would be so helpful.
How about one of the things I think you were getting to is that connection between, so I hear this a lot, versions of, well, we need to do this, and I've got to fight the administration to do it, or nobody in the administration is listening. And as I said, I always wonder when they say administration, who we mean there, because, you know, there's so many different people that have different kinds of responsibilities, and some of whom seem really, people are like, well, what's a good experience? Like, people will describe, well, this person. You know, here's a bunch of people who are doing really good work, but boy, the administration's really a problem. Like, you just described 4 administrators, so, but. So it's always kind of a little curious about what that means. That's not what I want to ask right now, but I'm curious about what we could do, you know, here as sort of the ultimate representation of the administration, right? Everybody in the administration technically works for me. What are the ways that the administration can bridge that gap? Oh yeah, that's a good question too.
That was something I was going to mention. So often when people refer to the administration, I think they think of this, the way that we use the word they in regards to, like, the government or the system, it becomes that large overpowering force that is kind of invisible in who it actually consists of. But also when I speak towards the administration, that comes from my experience of having direct confrontations with people in the administration during the student protests of last semester, and having to work directly with the former president and secretary and treasurer, and argue with them to try and get very simple communicative movements to happen. But also, I feel as if the biggest thing that needs to happen is there needs to be more outreach to students to involve them, more student participation. For example, if we had a student working on the website, if we had students working on ideas for fundraisers, if we had the divs be open to the public, and if we had more people from the community coming to div shows, things like that would involve the community more, would have students, would give students more power, and would be a very simple step just to get us involved. So having administration not be this mysterious this mysterious large power that is looming over us, and instead have it be people that we can talk to face to face, people that we can go to about our concerns, and people that we feel like we have a connection with that allows us to participate in how the school grows.
Yeah, I would say I definitely agree with that there's definitely a divide between students, faculty, and staff and what we see as the administration. I feel like we as students don't necessarily know people who work in like the dean of faculty office or like the president's office or like things like that, like on a personal level as we do with faculty and staff, because we see them regularly during the week and we see them in our day-to-day lives, but when it's to like somebody in a more professional office setting, it's like you only go to them when you need something or when something's wrong, because they're not necessarily readily available just like in day-to-day life at Hampshire.
Right. Are there ways to that so I'm just going to confess that one of my frustrations over the last 4 months, tomorrow will be 4 months I've been here, has been trying to figure out the avenues to connect to students, right? So we don't really have at least right now, like a functioning student government, right? And we don't have clear sort of representative organizations, and so I can have open office hours every week, but students don't come. We ask questions of the president, people don't put them in. So I go out to events and I talk to people, but I keep seeing the same people, right? How would we better? How do I invite students in? How do I find them to talk to them to overcome these kinds of concerns and suspicions?
That's such a tough question, I would say. And another, I was planning to cross question. I was thinking about another thing, like I've worked really closely with a lot of staff members for different things, and I have connected on a very personal level with them, and I feel for them just because they've been incredibly kind to me in these 2.5 years that I've been here. And one thing that I've noticed after in fall 2019 is that so many of them have like multiple roles, so they're unable to like assist me in one specific thing just because they have so many other things to look after. And I'm just wondering, like, how should I navigate that kind of space, because I need to get that kind of work done, but that person is so busy with something else, and they have to pay attention to that as well because that's part of their job. And I'm just like sitting and thinking, like, what should I do? Because without the intervention of a staff member or someone from the administration, I would be unable to accomplish that specific thing. So.
Yeah, I would just say, to go back to your point about like why aren't students showing up, I obviously can't speak for everyone, but I think in general there is like a lack of morale and hope for what is happening at Hampshire. Even before what happened last January, I think there's definitely always been a lack of like community and a lack of people who are really invested in like coming together as one cohesive group. And I think that's why you get specific people coming over and over again without like the whole community. I think there's just a lot of lack of morale in terms of like what's happening in our community and like what we can do to fix it. And like nobody necessarily has any answers, so they just like stop showing up.
And I've had a lot. I mean, I have to say, it's interesting to ask that question because it's, my experience in the performance I've been in Hampshire has been a sort of, constant series of really amazing experiences with people being engaged and excited and optimistic. Now, most of that is meetings with faculty, staff, and a set of selected students who seem to be really engaged in this. There are 725 students on this campus, and I keep seeing the same 30 or 40 over and over again, so I know they're not representative. But my experience has been this is a really positive, engaged, excited place. People are looking forward to the future. So I would like to hear some of the positive stories that have happened for you guys. I mean, you came back, you're still here, right? There must be some good things that have happened.
I can go. I'm okay. So I have like two sides of my personalities where some of the people are really, really alarmed when I speak any good of Hampshire, and some people are like, "Oh, you're obviously going to advocate for Hampshire." But aside from all the biases I would probably have, I feel extremely fortunate to be at this college because I can compare my experience with my sister who goes to another college in Maine, and that college has everything that probably Hampshire would want, like good money and things like that. But I feel there's such a huge divide in both for experiences just because I chose to come here, and I am so fortunate that I felt so incredibly supportive of all the so-called dumb ideas that I've presented in these 4 years. And whenever I go to present my work at different places, I feel so great that my education has kind of prepared me to talk about it so confidently and not really question my entire existence with this one thing. And I feel like that's so important because I feel like I would not have achieved that anywhere else, and I wouldn't have ever thought about my education as something experimental and practical, something that I would probably go ahead doing in the real world when I graduate. And I feel like that's such an important thing, and I'm so fortunate for that and grateful.
I second that heavily. I mentioned earlier that I am often frustrated with how a lot of the responsibility is on the students to make things happen at Hampshire, but also I am so grateful for that aspect of Hampshire because it has taught me to take initiative. And most of my wonderful experiences at Hampshire have been a result of me wanting to do something and making it happen on my own or with a group of people completely spontaneously. And I wouldn't have gotten the opportunity to do that if things were just handed to me. This place teaches me to have momentum, to have drive, and to make the things that I want to happen for myself. And so I've had community jam sessions, I've had multiple bands here, I've had art collectives, we've put on performances. We've done so many things that at the beginning of the day they weren't an idea, and then within a couple of hours we put it all together and then made something happen. And I don't think that kind of drive would exist in me if everything was available for me right away. And I'm really grateful to Hampshire for teaching me how to take initiative, how to be a person who makes things happen.
I would agree with everything you both said. I remember being 16, it was my junior year of high school, and being very apprehensive about the whole college application thing and knowing and like having my heart set on choosing Hampshire, and that's a decision that I'm really happy to make every day when I wake up here. I'm grateful that I get to go to school here and that I have the friends that I do, and I've been exposed to the classes and the academics. And I have so many great connections with like fellow students who are friends, who I live with, and like faculty and professors who've just absolutely changed my entire life. And I don't think I would be who I am today if I didn't go here, and I'm always grateful for that.
There's a lot of these are examples of building these kind of almost spontaneous communities in order to pursue projects or to think about your academic ideas in ways that are just sort of unfold your mind in different directions. And so maybe part of what the lesson for me coming out of this is, how does the administration, become a better partner for students in helping them find those connections and fostering that ability to make more of those communities and engage in more of those kinds of collaborations. And other ways that we can build in our curriculum right? In the academic and co-curricular experience, more opportunities to help people find those if they're, because not everybody's going to jump out and pull everybody together. That there has to be people out there for you to pull together. How do we help people do that? Work we're doing right now, I just came from a faculty meeting about thinking about restructuring the curriculum in ways that foreground creating collaborations with it between faculty that model the collaborations for students and create structures that overcome the kind of the inertia of isolation that seems to have characterized Hampshire for 50 years, and that we have to work, administration and faculty and staff, people design the structures, both administratively but also physically, that have reinforced that isolation to push against it. And so it's something. It's been a constant theme of the work that staff and faculty have been doing all fall to try to imagine a better student experience. That has essentially been that has been the first question that's been asked in all of this work, because we're as aware of that as you are, right? You can see what's going on there.
I mean, I feel like to an extent, it's definitely reaching most students. I'm a bit biased. My advisor is Rachel Conrad, and she's in charge of all the so she's constantly bringing things to our Div 3 class and having us, give our thoughts and opinions on it. And I think there's also something to be said for being in your final year at Hampshire and seeing where things have evolved. But I would say in terms of older students on campus who have been here, there's definitely interest and curiosity and a desire to learn more and maybe participate with the new changes to the curriculum.
I have felt rather discouraged from participating in the evolution of the school because I sacrificed my entire semester last year in participating in the student protests. I put so much work into this school. We had 3-hour meetings almost every day. I was sleeping in an office for 75 days. It was exhausting. It destroyed me. I failed some of my classes. I wasn't able to get the kind of education that I wanted. My entire life became absorbed by trying to save this school. And there has been very little recognition of the work that the students put in and of the fact that it was the students that made this school continue, that kept this school alive. And so I will admit I have not been participating because I'm exhausted and I'm a little irritated. But I want to be more involved because the reason that I did that was because I love this school and I want to see how it's going to grow.
Yep. Well, one of the things that I would like to know is how can someone, this is just a personal thing, it's maybe not great TV, but I'd like to know more about the kinds of work students are doing before we get to the Div 3 presentations, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are there venues and ways for people that are not in the classroom to see what people are doing as they move along through their education, apart from sort of individually talking? So every time I talk to a student, I ask, what's your question, what's your pursuit, what's your project, right? But there doesn't seem to be a good way to see that at a wide scale. Am I missing something, or is it?
I think that's such a great question because I don't know what's the missing piece in the entire thing. I feel like I'm a very mad person, I would say. I'm always on the outlook to look for all the possible resources and options that I can get to. And I feel like part of my Div 3, I felt just because I didn't have, I had nobody working on the specific thing that I'm working on at Hampshire, I had to look everywhere else. Now, I'm working with people at UMass Boston and in India and other places. And I really, really had to work for 2 entire years to get to that point. And I strongly feel that I should have received some sort of support in that sense. And I'm sure there are so many community members who could have really helped in that, and just because like nobody knew and I couldn't convey my sentiments in a certain sense that, oh, this is the kind of support that I'm seeking for. And I feel like this is the piece that I'm scared that a lot of people might just give up on their really brilliant ideas just because they feel they don't have adequate support. Also, just like if students can constantly share what they've done and something that they've done outside this school that can really benefit other students, I think that would be so important. Like 2 weeks ago, I got into this program. It's called Clinton Global Initiatives, and I got into the class of 2020. And I'm doing like part of my Div 3 with them. I'm working with them for 1 whole year, and they're helping me scale my project. And I think Hampshire students are such an incredible fit for that. Like I see all the other accepted students are PhD students from Cornell and I don't know where other spaces. And I was at first really intimidated. Like this is a very competitive program, but this is what Hampshire is giving to the world. And I feel I'm not trying to like brag my own self, but I'm just a very small piece of this entire thing. I've met people who do such incredible work, and they deserve to be out there, and they deserve all that support. So I just feel like the student-to-student connection is kind of missing too, because I don't know if it's the humility coming somewhere in between, or it's just like not having a proper platform to have those conversations.
Wow. Yeah, so connecting seems to be a big issue, and community seems to be a big issue. And they seem to be one of the big challenges on both of those issues is that they have been in the kind of central challenges of Hampshire students since 1970. Like every student, every graduate I talk to, one of their students, like it's kind of like these conversations. Here's this incredible thing I did, and I learned so much from failing and fighting, and then but I felt so alone and disconnected, right? Or it was so hard because I didn't have, I had this little community that I couldn't. 1975, 1985, 2015, right? And so I think we as the people who are trying to design the lived environment that students build a culture within, have got to find ways to push against that and provide opportunities for people to connect. But I think also that it has to be providing opportunities, right? It has to be pushing down the barriers, so doing things like offering, like one of the things they're talking about in the new first year Div 1 seminars is to build in end of semester symposiums where students can present collectively the work that they've been doing to one another to kind of say, look, this is the kind of stuff we're doing here, right? But then how do we have that kind of thing persist afterwards, right? And that's a real challenge.
I think the advising thing is, I really feel like we should be improving the advising structure, specifically the first year advising. I had an awful experience with my first year advisor. Like, I literally started questioning myself and like my capabilities after that. And after like my Div 2 committee, my Div 3 committee has been extremely helpful, and I would absolutely be nowhere without their support. But that's just 2 people amongst the entire campus community, and a lot of other students just like they do convey that their committees didn't tell them about this specific thing and like other things, and I feel like this is where we really need to strengthen our advising. These are the things that the committee members should be conveying to their students.
Right.
There's not been a single week in these 2 years when my committee has not forwarded me some random thing that they want me to read, and that has been so helpful. And it also shows that they care about what I want to do, and I feel like that should be a norm in our advising system.
Fortunately, it's been one of the other real points of emphasis in the work that we're doing this fall is how to address particularly first year advising. So the new Div 1 structure that's being designed is in part an attempt to address some of those structural problems of having, we don't have this year because there's only 13 students, but if you have 29 different faculty members teaching tutorial, they're going to be really uneven. and instead trying to do this going forward in ways that where there will be clusters of faculty teaching in related areas where the classes are either sometimes co-taught or speaking to one another in ways that make sense, but also then giving students who are in those seminars the opportunity to have potentially multiple advising connections, so that you can find, people within that cluster who are better fits. Maybe, and that'll have its own problems, right? We'll have to find out what those problems are, but that's been part of a through line in a lot of this work, is recognizing where advising doesn't work as well and trying to figure out structural ways to make it better, right? To get back to this kind of communication question. You gotta have communications with your advisors and students, have to communicate really clearly, and if that's not happening consistently and evenly, we need to create structures within our curriculum that get at that.
That's a really good point. I think our faculty are really overworked and have a lot to give. I know just personally, my committee member on my Div 3, he was actually laid off in the spring, so isn't technically employed by Hampshire, but is still on my committee and doing that work for me, even though he's not being paid. And I feel like we need to treat our faculty better. And I think a system like that could be really helpful to kind of even out the burden of advising the students.
That's the hope.
My committee explicitly said that you should reconsider transferring, because you will not be able to do this work anywhere else. And I think that has been the truest advice ever, because honestly, I would not be able to do this anywhere else. And people would think I'm mad, which is okay sometimes.
I never seriously entertained the idea of transferring or leaving. I knew that I was in it for the long haul, and I knew when I came my first year, even though I didn't know that any of this would have happened, that I wanted to be here for my 4 years and I was going to do whatever it took. And I think the combination of the faculty connections I've made and the friends I have and the community I have at Hampshire in general was enough to give me faith in staying.
I've never considered leaving Hampshire. This is the only college I applied to, and I knew that I was going to be here for all 4 years, and nothing was going to stop that.
That's sort of my story, right? I spent most of my professional career trying to get to Hampshire or make places that I worked more like Hampshire, and so I had no intention of going anywhere when I finally got here. I'm almost 50 years old, and I finally get to go to the college I want to go to. So.
This is a little controversial, but given that we have lost so many faculty and staff, so many on-campus amenities, this college is very much half of what it used to be. Why is tuition still the same?
That's a good question. All right. So I think I would approach that with in two ways. One, there are fewer people and fewer faculty and fewer people on campus, but also a lot fewer students. Right. So if you think about the services and opportunities per student, in some places those are actually larger than they were when we had 1,100 students. So some of it is you can only get so small before you can't take care of a campus. But in terms of say the faculty to student ratio is right now it's 10.8 faculty per student, which is significantly lower than it was in 2011, 12, 13, 14, 15, right? So it feels to people who were here at a period where we were a very low student faculty ratio, it feels like it's gotten bigger. But in fact, we're approaching what historically Hampshire has been. Right? So Hampshire from 1970 or 79 was supposed to be a 16-1 was supposed to be the faculty to student ratio that could work. And part of the challenge is we got, and this is a controversial way of putting it, but part of the challenge was over the last several years, we were hiring more and more faculty and fewer students were coming, right? And that's not a sustainable operation. So that's one answer to that. It feels like that, I know, but in fact, from a cost perspective, amount being spent per student, we're actually spending more per student now than we were last year, right? So, which is the second point, tuition is largely driven by what it costs to run an institution, combined with how much of the need of the students you can meet in order to get the kind of students and the diversity of students you want to get here. And so tuition isn't really a, I mean, you can call it whatever it is, it's $50,000, I think, and we haven't changed in a couple of years. 50. Well, the tuition part is 50,000. There's 12,000. So it's 62.5, I think, is the comprehensive fee, roughly 62.5. But not everybody lives on campus, right? So, but yeah, so called 62. The portion of that any particular student pays varies really widely, right? And so, and it's hardly anybody who's paying that full amount on our campus. And so that's, I think, the commitment here is to make sure that we find a way to make it possible for students who can benefit from this kind of education you can't do anywhere else can get here and can leave without the kind of, you know, massive debt that they have at other places. And our average student debt is like $25,000 or $26,000. So we're doing a good job on that, while being able to continue to provide the essential parts of that education. And the challenge we're having right now is, and we'll have for, well, forever now, is identifying what it is that is essential to make sure that students have the experience and the education that they come to Hampshire for. And what isn't? What are the things that we can choose not to do, so that we don't have as many gaps, because there are some things that we're doing that we really don't need to do. Yeah, so I don't know what I don't think we have a policy on being, we're need blinded admissions. There are very few colleges in the country that meet full need of every student. I think we have an aspiration to meet full need. I think and I don't want to be careful about numbers, but the last time I looked, it was somewhere in the range of the high 80s% of students whose full need was being met. Understanding full need is FAFSA, which isn't really full need, but give that as a may. But we don't meet the full need of every student we admit. We try to meet as many of them as we can. And I think that continues to be the policy. And in fact, one of the ways where you can see how effective that is 32% of our current student body are Pell eligible, which is moderate to low income students. And that's by far the highest percentage of the student body Pell eligible of the 5 colleges. Right? No one else is close to that number, including UMass, which is supposed to be, a public access institution, but, is not making itself as accessible as we are. So that is a commitment that's important. But that leads back to some of these questions, right? If we're providing that kind of aid to needy students, and 90% of our income every year comes directly from students, then there are limits on then how many services we can provide. And that's the balance we're constantly trying to figure out. Yeah, we have not changed our aid policies. We have not changed our expectation to try to do everything we can to meet as much of the full needs of the individual students that we can, and to select students based on who is most likely to thrive here, regardless of their income. Now we'll see what that looks like once we get this population of students in, but. Yeah, I think if you remember, response to that was like, if we could do that, we might think about it, but that really isn't there's not, there aren't hundreds of people out there that want to pay full tuition and come to Hampshire, even if there were, they wouldn't be given any special right to be admitted, but almost everybody gets some kind of discount to come here.